Hello, welcome back to Botany 101, General Botany. My name is Angela Nishimoto, and today, before we begin today's lesson, we're going to continue with the leaf. Remember last time we were talking about tissues, and we were also talking about the root and the stem, and we ended up talking about the leaf, but we didn't quite finish that. So today, first of all, I'm going to show you different kinds of leaf arrangements. Okay, so if we can go to the Elmo. Okay, we have here a little stem with leaves of the maua. Okay, this is a native Hawaiian plant, and you can see that here, remember, the node is a place where the leaf comes off the stem. So from here to here, okay, you have a node here, you have a node here, and then between these nodes you have the internode. Yes? So another thing too is that here you see you have a leaf at one node, you have another leaf at another node, and thirdly you have another leaf at another node. So here you have a leaf at each node, just a single leaf. This is what we call alternate leaf arrangement, okay, where the leaves are actually alternating on either side of the stem. Okay. Secondly, we also talked about opposite leaf arrangement. And here we have a little stem tip of the noni, also known as Morinda citrifolia. Okay, so here you can see that on either side of this node you have a leaf. So generally, opposite leaf arrangement, you have two leaves at each node, and they're usually opposite each other. Okay, so that's a good thing to remember. Okay. Now thirdly, we have here a little piece of a plant known as oleander. You can see too, unfortunately, this is from my home, and it has a little bit of pest problems here. I have a little bit of a mealybug infestation. An interesting thing about this kind of plant, this Nerium oleander, also known as oleander, is that it's extremely poisonous. There are sort of urban legends or stories about people who have actually taken a stick or a twig from this plant, dried twig, on the ground or something, use it to roast marshmallows or hot dogs with, and they've actually gotten really sick or maybe even died from it. Extremely poisonous plant. Here in Hawaii, you can see them all along the freeway because they do well, even with a lot of pollution. But if you take a look at the node here, on this area here, you'll see that at this node you have three leaves. Okay, so whorled, W-H-O-R-L-E-D, a whorled leaf arrangement, you have generally 3 or more leaves per node. Okay, so we had to look at, we had to look at alternate leaf arrangement, say in this maua, all right, where you have only one leaf at each node. And then we also took a look at the noni, Morinda citrifolia, important plant brought by the Polynesian people to Hawaii. Nowadays it's used medicinally. You see it's very glossy leaves. Did you know that you could eat the leaf too? You can almost make sort of like a lau with it. You can actually wrap chicken or pork or fish and maybe a vegetable if you wanted to. You could wrap it in the leaf, cook it, and you can actually eat this leaf. Okay, it is supposedly also something called an abortifacient too. I had a student from Southeast Asia, and she said that in her country, if a woman is carrying a baby, she doesn't want to eat any part of this plant, either the fruit or the leaf, because according to her tradition or their folk plant knowledge, this is supposed to be something that can bring on contractions in a woman, and she could lose a baby. Okay. Anyway, so here you have opposite leaf arrangement, where you have 2 leaves at each node. And then thirdly, we had whorled leaf arrangement. Okay, so these are going to be important for you to know that generally with a whorled leaf arrangement, you'll have 3 or more leaves per node. Okay. Anyway, so today, our topic for today, we're going to get into plant physiology. First of all, we're going to go through the last part of the lecture on leaves, and then we're going to attack, sort of frontal plant physiology. Often people's subject maybe that they think is very difficult, and I have to say that it is difficult, but don't worry. If you apply yourself, read the chapter, look over this tape and ask me questions. Okay, you'll get it. Don't worry. People do. Okay, it's hard, it is difficult, it calls for a lot of memorization and a lot of application, but you can get it. Okay, if I can, anybody can. All right. So first of all, today's objectives, okay, we're going to finish up on the leaves, and the leaves, of course, do the process known as photosynthesis. Okay, we did talk about organs. Organs are comprised of tissues, right? And in plants, they are the root, the stem, and the leaf. Those are the vegetative organs of the plant. And so there, root, stem, and leaf. Okay, vegetative organs. And then what do they do? Okay, recall that we talked about the root. The root, of course, mostly serves to anchor the plant and absorb water. Okay, whether the anchorage is in soil or on another plant. You remember, terrestrial plants anchored with their roots in the soil, epiphytic plants anchored with their roots on other plants. Okay, and we also did go into a little bit on some variations of the different kind of themes of organs. So generally, the organs of the plant are just variations of the themes. Okay, so the roots and the stems and the leaves are the vegetative organs of flowering plants. Okay, and of course, the leaves do that extremely important process known as photosynthesis. All right. Now, we also have the fact that we've seen the structure of a leaf. Yes, we've actually looked at the structure of a leaf. And if we go to the elmo, you can see that generally here, okay, you have, on this noni leaf, you have the blade, or the part of the leaf that does most of the photosynthesis, the blade. And here you have the leaf stem, known as the petiole, or the petiole. Okay, so this noni leaf shows both, and it is something called a simple leaf. All right. We also have compound leaves. Compound leaves occur when the blade of the leaf is dissected or divided into structures that we call leaflets. Leaflet just means little leaf. Okay. So we have simple leaves and we have compound leaves. And generally, compound leaves come in two types in general. Okay. You have the type of leaves that are called pinnately compound leaves. Secondly, you have other kind of compound leaves known as palmately compound leaves. All right. So if you actually look at pinnately compound leaf, okay, so here we have a little fern frond, or little fern leaf. Yes, and if you look at that, here you have the petiole. This part here, this whole area here corresponds to the blade. Okay, so in this case, okay, here you have a whole leaf, an entire leaf with the leaflets, okay, making up the blade. Now another thing about this too, you can remember that pinnately compound leaves have their leaflets arranged like, you know, the parts of a feather. You know, a feather, you know, has this sort of arrangement. Yeah, you have the center part of it with chevron sort of coming off of it. So pinnately compound leaves are like feathers. They have the leaflets arranged in that way. Okay, so here's one pinnately compound leaf, and here we have a little, that was a kupu-kupu fern leaf, and now here we have the stem, okay, of something called ule. Okay, this is a native Hawaiian plant, ule. Ule has been used by Hawaiian people to make fishnet mouths, because see, even though that it's a woody stem, it's flexible. You can actually bend it almost double upon itself. So people used to use this to make fishnet mouths, or the fishnet. So here you can see that these leaves, these are actually individual leaves. This is a single leaf. Okay, right here is a single leaf, and over here we have another leaf, and etc. So in this case, you have an alternate leaf arrangement, yes, because you have these individual leaves, only one coming off per node, but here you can see that the leaf is actually dissected into leaflets, okay, and this is a pinnately compound leaf right here, all right? So we've seen two examples of pinnately compound leaves. You had the kupu-kupu fern frond that we looked at, and we also have the ule leaves as well, yeah, with the pinnately compound leaves. Now, I'm going to actually show this here on the larger camera here. So here we have a single leaf of a plant known as the octopus tree. Sometimes they call it the umbrella tree. It's either Brassica actinophylla or Schefflera, depending on, you know, what book that you look at. Now, one of the things you'll see is that these are leaflets. This here is a petiole, okay, going almost to where it would have connected onto the plant. This is a single leaf with the blade dissected into leaflets. This is something that you can call a palmately compound leaf. Palmately compound, with the leaflets all coming off a single point. okay, on this plant. You can think of it like your palm of your hand. The 5 fingers of your, of your hand come off a single point, which is your palm. So you think of palmate leaf compound. You think of the palm of your hand with the individual leaflets coming off only a single point. So here's a good example, a very good example of a palmate leaf compound leaf, okay? The Brassia actinophylla, right? Okie doke, let's see. Next, okay, we also have the fact that you have different kinds of leaf venation as well, okay, in plants. So generally you have parallel leaf venation, and parallel leaf venation you would generally see in what kind of plant? Think about it. Think about what kind of leaf venation you would see in what kind of plant, okay? Because you should have come across this in your reading. We also have another kind of leaf venation, a general type called netted leaf venation. So think about this also. You have one kind of flowering plant that has parallel leaf venation. You'll have another kind of flowering plant that has netted leaf venation, okay? So think about that. Furthermore, netted venation comes in 2 types. You have pinnate netted venation, okay? You also have palmate netted venation, all right? So in terms of the parallel leaf venation, we can kind of take a look here, all right? So here we have a tea leaf, okay, or key. People call it tea or key. If we look at it under the elmo here, all right, generally what we'll see is that you have the blade part with a midrib, and of course the midrib is a vein. You remember veins that we talked about? Veins, of course, are places that the plant uses to actually move substances within it, okay? So you can see here that in this part of the leaf, in the blade part of it, you have a midrib, the main vein of the leaf, and in this tea leaf you'll have these secondary veins coming off. And one of the things you'll see is all of these secondary veins are parallel to each other. So in terms of this kind of plant, which is a monocot, okay, remember monocots usually have parallel leaf venation. Okay? Generally in this tea leaf we have all these veins parallel to each other. Another leaf that I brought to show is the leaf of something called uki uki, right? Might not be able to see it so well here, so if we kind of take it closer, you can actually see, okay, that the veins, here's some water spots here, are parallel to each other. You can see them. So uki uki, also tea, other kind of monocot plants generally have what we call parallel leaf venation, okay, where you have the leaves, the secondary, the leaves having secondary veins that are parallel to each other, all right? Now we're going to look at some netted vein leaves, okay? And this is one type. Oops, let's go back a little bit. Sorry about that. So here, when you're taking a look, okay, at the leaf of a noni, what you can see is it does have a mid vein or midrib, yeah, where the main vein. Always remember that the veins in the plant are actually vascular tissue, right? Remember what kind of vascular tissue there is? You have xylem and you have phloem, right? Xylem made up of tracheids, vessel elements, parenchyma cells, and also fiber cells, all right? And phloem being made of, let's see, sieve tube members, companion cells, parenchyma cells, and also fiber cells as well, okay? So here you can see that the secondary veins are coming off the midrib in the same type of formation like a pinna, like a feather. Okay, so here you have almost like chevrons. Another thing too is that on these secondary veins you have smaller tertiary veins, third level veins, and between them you have even more. In fact, if we turn these over and we look at them closer, you can see that the veins, the venation, is netted. You can see a whole network of veins in the leaf. Okay, that's why they call it netted leaf venation, as well as calling it pinnate venation, right? Now I have a couple, 2 examples of what we call palmate venation, okay? Remember last time we saw the ava leaf? Yeah, this is ava. And here you can see that it's a heart-shaped leaf with a quilted appearance, and you can see that here you have the midrib, but what you see is that the secondary veins come off a single point. So this is a good example of palmate venation, palmate netted venation, because you can see, even from looking at it here, that generally, yeah, the veins are all forming a network. okay, inside of the leaf. So here, a good example in the ava, which is another Polynesian introduced plant, also known as kava kava, and the scientific name of it is Piper methysticum. Okay, so it is actually in the same genus as black pepper, okay, or Piper nigrum. Now here's another example. This is a native Hawaiian plant known as a ma'o, okay, ma'o, also known as Hawaiian cotton. And here you can see that the secondary veins, you have the main vein, right, usually on one part of it, and you see here you have secondary veins all coming from one point. Okay, so this is another example of palmate leaf venation. Okay, palmate leaf venation, which is a variation of netted venation. Okay, very good. All right. So when we look at the area inside of the leaf, okay, first of all, you might say, okay, so what kind of leaf does a dicot have? Okay, what kind of leaf? What does it look like inside of a monocot? All right. So first of all, we're going to put this little model up here. It's actually a kind of big model. And we're going to look at a cross-section, okay, of a dicot leaf. Okay, if you can see this, all right? So when you look at this model, what do you see? Okay, you see this is sort of like a giant leaf, okay, so sort of showing. So what you see, first of all, the top layer, okay, of here. Remember, what is the outermost layer of a leaf? Do you remember what it's called? Right? It's called an epidermis. Okay, so here you have the epidermal cells, one layer thick, one cell thick, okay, from here. Then under that, you'll have these long, skinny cells in dicot leaves, typical dicot leaves. And these are called, okay, the palisade cells, long and skinny. You can see that they're green. Okay, they actually have depictions of chloroplasts in here. Okay. Now this area in this model that is colored yellow and pink and green, this is the vascular bundle. Okay, this is actually vascular tissue, the veins that run through the leaf. So this is probably a large vascular bundle. Here, these cells are depicted as being xylem cells. Here are phloem cells, okay, more on the bottom side, all right? And this is actually what they call a vascular bundle, all right? And then, okay, somewhere in here, in what they call the mesophyll, or the middle part of the leaf, you have the spongy cells. They call it the spongy cells because you have a lot of air spaces in between these. Because what do the spongy cells do? Usually the palisade cells do most of the light harvesting because they're on the top. They're on the top surface of the leaf, yeah? And in here, the spongy cells are more down here. What do? Usually what the spongy cells do, they act as sponges. They will absorb carbon dioxide. How do carbon dioxide get into the leaves? You remember what actually is a place where carbon dioxide enters the leaves? They enter the leaves through the stomates, kind of depicted down here. Stomates, they're like pores in the leaf. Okay, they're like holes. The word stoma itself means mouth. Okay. So anyway, so we have the upper epidermis, the palisade cells. Sometimes you can have one layer, sometimes you can have two layers, you can have more layers, 3 layers or more of palisade cells, which do most of the light harvesting, okay? The vascular bundles, okay, the vascular tissue, because every part of the plant, just like our body, every part of our body needs blood and oxygen, right? So the plant too, every part of the plant needs water and other substances, okay, to do their job. Anyway, so we have the spongy cells, we have the lower epidermis, and then we have the stomate. And if we actually look at this, sort of sideways this way, this little green thing here, okay, is actually depicting the surface, the epidermis of the leaf with the stomate on top. We're going to see stomates a little bit later on, okay, in terms of this lecture. Okay, let me put this out of the way. Okay, next, monocot. Okay, monocot leaf cross-section. We have a really good image of that. See, look at that. One of the things about this is you can see that you have an upper epidermis, yeah, up here. Let's see. Right up here, you have an upper epidermis with specialized cells. They're called bulliform cells. Don't worry about that. You have a lower epidermis, and here you can see like a side view of a stomate with the 2 guard cells guarding the pore or the hole between them. Yes? On the epidermis too, here's another stomate. And here you have the vascular bundle, okay, with the xylem cells here, yeah? Xylem vessels, and here you have the phloem. And this is the bundle sheath. This is like the vascular bundle. Another thing that you'll notice about the monocot cross-section is that unlike the dicot cross-section, the monocot cross-section, okay, has no differentiation between the different kinds of cells. So this is one reason why when you look at a cross-section of most monocot leaves, generally the top and the bottom don't look really different because you don't have the mesophyll or the middle of the leaf being differentiated into palisade and spongy cells. All right? Very good leaf cross-section. All right? Okay, then next we're going to look at different kinds of leaf adaptations. All right? So first of all, we have storage leaves. Okay, so let me kind of get this set up here. All right, so first of all, we have this rather sad-looking plant. It's rather sad-looking, sorry. What happens is that it's called aloe. Also, locally, people call it aloe, yes? So this plant here, aloe or aloe, yeah, people use it for burns and abrasions. It has this gelatinous substance inside of the leaves. You can break off a leaf. It has this kind of slimy substance, excellent for burns. When I was a little kid, I was visiting my auntie and uncle and my cousins. My cousin said, you know, he called me and he said, oh, this show is on TV. And I ran past my auntie and she was carrying a tray with hot water to make tea and it spilled on me. Well, right away my parents took me home and they put the aloe on my back. I never got any scarring. It was pretty bad burns too. Anyway, so aloe, very, very good as a medicinal plant. Also, you can see because of this gelatinous substance in it, it actually is very, very good. Okay, it actually is very, very good for, you know, for burns and other things like that. Very good medicinal plant. Anyway, I told that story about getting burned and stuff, and the reason why this plant is in a sorry state is my husband has sort of like a burn or an injury on his finger, and he's been breaking off all the leaves to use it for that purpose, which of course is what it's for. Unfortunately, this was actually the plant that I have in the best condition, just because he's been kind of picking them off the 2 or 3 different aloe plants that I have inside of our apartment. Okay, another kind of leaf adaptation. Amazingly, because you might recall that in roots and stems we have reproductive parts, right? And here we're actually looking here, okay, at a little piece of a plant called bryophyllum. Okay, bryophyllum is also known as mother of thousands, amazingly. So if you look at the tips of these leaves, these are succulent leaves. These are other leaves that store water or substances like that. They're very thick. But here, you can see that they have these little baby keiki. Okay, remember keiki are what people usually call little baby plants as well as baby humans too. But here, you have these little, tiny little plants, okay, coming off growing off of the leaf of this plant. And you can see why they call it mother of thousands, because a plant of this type, growing usually in dry areas, it can make hundreds and hundreds and thousands of little babies. Okay, that's why they call it mother of thousands. Yes? All right, then we also have another kind of leaf adaptation. So we looked at a storage leaf, like in the aloe, as well as in the mother of thousands. We've seen reproductive leaves, asexual reproduction, because remember, the baby plants only have one parent. Okay, so it's sort of like the plant is cloning itself in a way, and it's a way for it to do reproduction so that it can survive. Now, another kind of plant adaptation that we see is called mimicry. Okay, mimicry, what do you think that means? What is a mimic? A mimic is somebody, a person or a thing that copies something else. And here where we see, this is bougainvillea, of course, yeah? But if you look at the bougainvillea, okay, what do you see? What is a flower? What is not part of the flower? We haven't gotten into flowers yet. But still, you see this small little whitish, creamy colored structure? This is actually the flower. This part here are parts called bracts. B-R-A-C-T-S. Bracts are actually mimicking petals. Okay, remember from the first lecture we talked about that generally petals attract pollinators, but here you have these leaves kind of acting like petals. Okay, now could you think of some other kind of plant that has that same kind of appearance where you have the leaves actually looking like petals? Think about it. Think about seasonal. What's going to come up, you know, every year? Yeah, at the end of the year. We have Christmas, and so what happens during Christmas time? You get a Christmas tree, which is usually a gymnosperm. And another thing too is some people will actually give you, or you'll get for yourself or your office, poinsettia. You know, all the red part of the poinsettia, those are actually bracts. The flowers that are inside are really, really very, very small. They actually form something called, I think, a cyathium, which is a bunch of flowers, and they're only, you know, like about this big, about the size of my pinky, and that's a whole cluster of flowers. Okay, so poinsettia, the red parts, or nowadays they have these kind of jazzy new types. They have flesh color, they have orange, they have broken color, you know, the kind with that has 2 or 3 different colors in those bracts. So they're actually bracts, they're not actually petals. Okay. We also have another kind of situation where you have another kind of leaf adaptation known as a phylode. Okay, Phylllode. All right. And here, okay, on the elmo, we have a piece of koa, okay? Koa, which is one of the main forest trees in Hawaii. Koa being very famously used, you know, the trunk of the tree being famously used for our canoe, right? The wa'a, or the canoe, because in Hawaii, the koa grew so big, some of them were over 65 feet tall, okay? You could actually make an entire canoe hull from one trunk of a koa tree. Anyway, so here, these are leaf adaptations known as phyllodes, all right? What is it? You're thinking, well, this, okay, remember that we were talking about venation? If you actually look at the veins on these part of the leaves, they look like they're parallel venation. Now, koa is in the plant family Fabaceae. It's in the legume family. And this plant actually is a dicot, okay? The members of the Fabaceae are dicots, but here, looks like parallel venation. Why is that so? Well, so this is from a mature part of the plant, yeah, these phyllodes. Now, if you actually look at some new part of the plant, you actually see that the leaves of the young leaves of the plant, you know, from the juvenile plant, they actually are, okay, they actually are pinnately compound. Remember pinnately compound, right? So if you look at this, this is actually from the same tree as those phyllodes are from. So here you have leaf, this whole thing is a leaf with pinnately compound. Not is it just pinnately compound, but it is bipinnately compound, because each of these leaflets, these are all leaflets, are actually dissected into leaflets. So we have twice pinnately compound leaves. Okay? The most I've ever seen has been 3 times pinnately compound, which happens in the hapu'u, or the native tree fern. Well, if you look at these, what happens, you know, as the leaves are maturing, generally the petiole gets to be longer. Okay, the petiole gets to be longer, and it starts to get flattened, and then you have venation in it. So when you actually look at the phyllodes, okay, of a mature koa, what this part actually is this is actually the petiole. What happens is that the blade is no longer apparent anymore on mature koa, or on the mature parts of the koa plant. So you see here that the reason why the veins are parallel is because this is actually the leaf stem, or the petiole, which is flattened and expanded and actually makes for what functions in the plant as a blade, but it is actually a petiole. Okay? Okie doke, so that pretty much sums up what we want to know about leaves. Okay, so this is important material, and hopefully, I mean, that things are good, all right? The next thing we're going to talk about is called transport in plants, okay? And so transport, remember that transport actually involves, okay, the movement of water as well as the movement of sugar, okay, and other organic substances in the plant. So one thing that happens in a plant, okay, is something called transpiration. What is transpiration? Transpiration is the evaporative loss of water from the leaves through the stomates. Remember the stomates? The stomates, or stomata, are places where carbon dioxide can enter into the leaf, okay? Because carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. So water has a tendency to move upward. So water, almost all the water that you have in a plant comes in to the plant through the roots. Okay, remember the roots that we talked about last lecture? So we have the roots with the root hairs in it. That's a place where, you know, big surface area, a lot of root hairs makes for more surface area, allows a plant to absorb more water. So the water actually moves upwards through the roots, into the stem, into the leaves, and out of the leaves in the process known as transpiration. So in a plant, water moves upwards. Okay, moves from the roots into the stem, into the leaves, and out of the leaves through the process known as transpiration. okay? All right, so what happens is that water moves out. So through the stomates, water and oxygen gas. Oxygen gas is a byproduct of photosynthesis, okay? So water and oxygen gas moves out of the leaf, okay? Carbon dioxide that is used by the plant to do photosynthesis to make sugars, carbon dioxide moves into the leaf, okay? So this is through the process, known as photosynthesis and also transpiration. So water moves out of the leaf in transpiration. Oxygen gas leaves the leaf, which is a byproduct of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide moves into the leaf through the stomates. And this evaporative loss of water, known as transpiration, has a major role to play in the global cycling of water. Because one of the things that happens is that if you have plants, much forest growing in an area, if you have a lot of forest, like the Hawaiian Islands used to be before, if you have a lot of forest, well, you have a lot of, water being taken up, being transpired or moved out of the plant through evaporative loss of water, right? So what is that? That results in a lot of water vapor. You have a lot of water vapor, you have more clouds, you have more precipitation, you have more rain. One of the reasons probably why Oahu is drier and hotter than other islands in the 8 major islands of the Hawaiian chain is probably due to the fact that you had a lot of deforestation here. You had a lot of removal of forests to build roads and houses and cities. Yeah, so this is one reason why Oahu is hotter and drier, is because we don't have as much forest as some of the other islands, okay? That also has to do, unfortunately, it has to do also with bad things like famine. What happens? If you have deforestation, removal of forests, then you don't have as much water, you don't have as much rainfall. So what can happen is that generally you don't have the same amount of plants growing. So what can happen? Something called desertification. What happens is once fertile land becomes fallow, not fallow, but it becomes dry because it doesn't have enough rainfall on it. So what you have in some areas of the world, you have deserts happening, and then what you have is maybe famine because people can't grow crops anymore because they don't have water anymore, and maybe they don't have irrigation. So that is unfortunately a byproduct of losing forests or cutting down forests, is that you can get hunger and famine. Okay, that happens. Unfortunately, it's a very sad thing. Okay? Okay, so water in the process of transpiration is lost by the plant through the process known, through transpiration, through stomates, okay, or stomata. Another thing about this is that generally more than 90% of the water taken up by the plants through their roots, okay, actually is lost through transpiration. So 99% or more of the water. Now what happens too is that the guard cells, the guard cells are the 2 cells that surround the stomata, okay? When the guard cells are full of water or turgid, they open. Okay? When the guard cells are flaccid, the stomate closes. What happens then? Okay? So the guard cell itself, see, and here we have 2 beautiful images, very, very good images. Yeah. So here you can see that the whole, so the word stoma itself, stoma means mouth. Okay. So this area here you can think of as a mouth. All right. With these 2 cells here being the guard cells. So the guard cells, just like the lips of your mouth, guard your mouth. Okay. So it's like that. So these 2 guard cells, when the guard cells, they have these fibrils or these fibrils that kind of move this way, perpendicular to the length of the guard cell. So what happens is that when the guard cell is turgid, when there's enough ions, potassium ions, they actually move into the guard cell and water follows. Okay? So what happens is that the guard cell gets turgid, full of water, then the stomate opens. So you'll actually have an open stoma, okay, or open mouth. Right? What happens in now this other image, very good because you can actually see chloroplasts, even though it is a black and white image. Okay, so here you have chloroplasts, and of course the chloroplasts do photosynthesis, right? And usually it is the guard cells as being the only cell on the surface of the epidermis of a plant. So here, this is bryophyllum, remember the mother of thousands. So this is in the same, at least in the same genus, same type of plant. This one here, okay, this one also, the stomate is open. It's not as open as the other one is, maybe. What happens is that when conditions are dry, when it's windy, when it's hot, when it's sunny, what happens? Well, what happens is that if you actually have that kind of conditions, what happens is that the water will leave the guard cell, and then the guard cells will get flaccid and the stomate will close. okay? So that means the stomate isn't open anymore. So if the stomate isn't open anymore, what happens? Well, what happens is that carbon dioxide can't get in, and then pretty much photosynthesis will stop, okay, when the stomate is closed, depending on the type of plant, okay? Now next, we're going to talk about diffusion and osmosis, all right? First of all, what is diffusion? You can think of diffusion, okay, as a movement of any kind of substance from an area of where it's highly concentrated to where it's has lower concentration. So an example I like to use in my classes is, say for example, you are a person, yeah, a woman or a man, and you're getting ready for work, okay? So what can happen is that you put some cologne, okay, or aftershave on your skin. Well, on your skin, these aftershave lotion or cologne molecules are at a higher concentration. What's actually happening? Okay, what's actually happening? What's happening is that the cologne molecules on your skin at higher concentration are actually moving around on your skin, okay, wherever you put them on your face or behind your ear, on your throat area. What happens is that these molecules are actually moving around randomly in random movement, bouncing off each other, bouncing off, other molecules. What's happening is that these molecules, these scent molecules, are leaving your skin. They're leaving your skin and diffusing, okay, from an area of higher concentration on your skin into an area of lower concentration, which is the ambient surrounding atmosphere around you. And what happens is that when you walk into your office at work, or you're at the mall or something, you're shopping, anybody near to you, they're actually if you can smell the cologne molecules or the aftershave, they're actually breathing it in, and the molecules are actually latching onto receptors inside of your nose. So that's how we actually perceive smell. If you're actually smelling anything, you're breathing it. Okay, you're actually breathing it into your body. Okay, so that's actually a good example of diffusion. So diffusion can happen through the air. It can also happen through water as well. Okay. Now another kind of concept is osmosis, all right? Osmosis is when you have water molecules. Osmosis is a special case of diffusion where you have water molecules moving from an area of higher concentration across a membrane, okay, to an area of lower concentration. So osmosis pretty much is just the diffusion of water molecules through a membrane. Now this illustration shows diffusion, okay? It's actually showing diffusion. It's not showing osmosis. But what happens here is here you have a membrane, okay, a semi-permeable membrane. What does that mean? That means that this membrane will allow certain substances to cross through it, okay, but will not allow other substances to cross through it. So here on this side of this membrane, you have a high concentration of a certain kind of solute, maybe say sodium chloride, okay, salt, okay, which is a small molecule. So what's happening is that on this side of the membrane, you have a high concentration of the solute. On this side of the membrane, you have a lower concentration of the solute. You also have water, because these are in aqueous solutions. And so we have water too. Water is a very small molecule. Remember, it's only made up of 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogens, yeah, H2O. And so what's happening is that these molecules are being able to diffuse through the membrane, the salt molecules as well as the water molecules. They're actually moving around, bouncing off each other, bouncing off, the salt molecules bouncing off each other, bouncing off the water molecules. So what will happen over a period of time? The salt that's on this side will eventually diffuse to this side, and also water molecules too are moving back and forth through the membrane. What will eventually happen over time is that generally you'll have about equal concentrations of the solute as well as the same concentrations of water molecules, okay, on either side of the membrane, because nature wants to have a balance. Nature wants to keep things even, okay, wants to have them the same on either side. So what will eventually happen is this higher concentration of solute molecules will move across the membrane. There will be a net movement of solute molecules to the other side of the membrane. Another thing that will happen will that you'll have a net movement of water molecules from this side of the membrane. So this side, water is at a higher concentration. This side is at a lower concentration. So what will happen is that the water molecules will also have a net movement of water in the opposite direction, because remember, the water molecules are moving in over here and over here. What you'll have is a net movement of water molecules from this side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane. Okay, so what you'll eventually have is the same concentration of water and the same concentration of solute on both sides of the membrane in this instance, okay, when you have diffusion. So diffusion can happen through the air. It can also happen through water as well. okay? Now another thing too, okay, so in this process known as transpiration, remember that water enters through the plant, okay, from the soil, all right? So think about what we were just talking about, okay? So remember that we have a cell membrane, remember that osmosis, okay, is actually the movement of water through a membrane. So water is absorbed from the soil. How does that happen? Okay, it's actually absorbed from the soil through the process known as osmosis. Okay, osmosis is the process of water moving through a membrane from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Okay, so how does that happen? Usually the water is absorbed from the soil via the root hairs. Okay, so it's moved by the process of osmosis, because usually the root in the soil has a higher concentration of water outside of the root than inside of the root. Okay, so what happens is that water concentration is higher in the soil than it is in the plant. So therefore you have water molecules moving through the membrane, okay, through the cell membrane via the root hairs, okay, into the root hair, then into the rest of the cells inside of the plant. Okay, because it moves through osmosis, like due to the physical properties of the water molecule and of the soil surrounding it. Usually the soil, even if to you the soil doesn't seem very wet, usually the soil is wetter or has more water in it than inside of the cell. So what will happen is through the process of osmosis. So osmosis is a passive process. The plant doesn't have to invest any energy to allow osmosis to happen. So the water molecules will move by osmosis into the root hair, then into the root, okay, eventually moving into the vascular tissues. And remember, the vascular tissues, okay, in the terms of the movement of water molecule, of course, are xylem cells. So here we have xylem vessel elements, okay, other types of cells making up the xylem. So the water is absorbed from the soil, okay, through osmosis, okay, through the process of osmosis into the root hairs, then move, okay, in the root to the vascular tissues, move into the stem, and then into the leaves, and then the water is transpired out of the leaves. So let's continue about how this happens, okay? For one thing, you have the concepts known as cohesion and adhesion. Okay, what is cohesion? Okay, for one thing, remember when we talked about this before, water is a polar molecule. Okay, water has the electronegative, right, oxygen molecule, which has a tendency to pull electrons toward itself. So on that side of the water molecule, right, you can picture like Mickey Mouse ears on a head. Okay, so on the oxygen side of the molecule, okay, you have a little bit of a negative charge. So on the other side of the molecule, you have a little bit of a positive charge. So water molecules tend to form hydrogen bonds between each other in solution. So water is sticky. Okay, water has a tendency to stick. Okay, so when water molecules stick to each other in the hydrogen bonding, that's called cohesion. You can think of sort of like company, together, yeah? Co means together, CO means together, hesion means to stick. So water molecules tend to stick together. Okay, water molecules tend to make these hydrogen bonds, make them sticky, so they tend to stick together. This is why, one of the reasons why, when you have, you know, when you wash and wax your car, that it's really nice, and then the water molecules, they tend to bead on the surface of the car because the water molecules are sticking to each other, okay? Another concept is that generally water molecules will also stick to other substances. This process is known as adhesion, okay? So if we can kind of go to the Elmo here, we can actually draw a little picture. So when you have a graduated cylinder, maybe I should have brought a graduated cylinder, but if you have a graduated cylinder and you have water in it, what happens? Okay, you have something known as a meniscus, like right here, yes? So when you have a meniscus, what's actually happening? Yeah, you have a little dip in the bottom when you look at the water inside of the graduated cylinder. What's actually happening is that the water molecules on this side and on this side are sticking to the glass. Okay, so you have water molecules sticking to a different substance. That's a concept known as adhesion. Okay, where you have water molecules actually sticking to a different substance. So what's happening in the column? Remember, xylem cells are laid end to end to each other, the vessel elements as well as the tracheids. Okay, what's happening is that the inside of this pipe, okay, known as a xylem, Okay, xylem cells. The water molecules are actually sticking to each other. They're sticking to each other, right, in the process known as cohesion. They're also sticking to the sides of the xylem vessel and the tracheids. They're sticking to the sides of it. They're like pipes, like the graduated cylinder. So the water molecules are also sticking to the sides of the xylem vessel elements. So what's happening? That creates a pull, because what's happening is that the water cells, the water molecules, are actually moving from the root into the stem, into the leaves. And what's happening in the leaves? They're actually transpiring. They're leaving the leaves. Okay, they're leaving the leaves, okay, through the stomates, right? They're diffusing, because remember the stomate is like a hole. It's like a hole inside of the leaf, right? You have a hole. What's happening is that the water molecules are moved into the leaf, and they're diffusing through the stomate out into the atmosphere, because usually the atmosphere is less moist than inside of the cell. So first of all, you have water molecules moving by osmosis into the root hair, into the root, okay? Then forming this unbroken column of water molecules moving up, okay, by the forces of cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion, the water molecules sticking together. Adhesion, the water molecules sticking right to the sides of this pipe. So what you have is whole column of water being pulled up through the force of diffusion, because what's happening is transpiration, is that the water molecules are actually leaving the leaf through the stomate, creating a pull on the water molecules. So that's how people can figure you can have this tree 325 feet high. Okay, some of those huge redwoods and other trees, in the in the evergreen forest, coniferous forest, really big trees. So how does a plant do that? Just by these forces. That's what people think now. That you have osmosis, okay, water moving into the root. You have cohesion, water molecules sticking together, water molecules sticking together to the sides of the xylem vessel element through adhesion. Then you have diffusion, water molecules moving out of the leaf, okay, one by one. Okay, because the outside of the leaf is drier than inside of the leaf. So these are the general physical properties of the water molecule due to cohesion, adhesion, osmosis, diffusion. That's how actually transpiration happens. Okay? Okay, so water moves out of the leaves. Do you remember what we just said? Okay, water moves out of the leaves, okay, by diffusion. Okay, just because outside is the water molecules are actually at a higher concentration inside of the leaf than outside of the leaf. So the water will move from higher concentration inside of the leaf to a lower concentration outside of the leaf, okay, so through diffusion, okay, via the stomata, all right? Okay, the next topic we're going to talk about a little bit is called the movement of sugar, all right? And generally, the movement of sugar or other organic compounds inside of the plant is a little different. Okay? It's a little bit different than how water is moved to the plant, because recall that water molecules actually move from an area of higher concentration. Well, they actually move from the root into the stem, into the leaf. So water moves in an upward direction. Okay? It actually moves upward, right? Now, the movement of sugar is different. Okay? It's different in the plant than that. So in the plant, water actually will move from a source to a sink, okay? And what we'll do is that we'll explain that, see? So let me get my little handy-dandy drawing tool here. What happens, okay, so we can kind of come to the Elmo and see this, that we have sort of plants known as biennial plants, okay? So that's oftentimes a good type of plant to illustrate this with. What happens is that the seed will germinate, and you have a root in the soil. So this is a soil. You have the root growing in here, okay? Have the leaves in the first year of growth. What happens? The leaf is actually doing photosynthesis. What then happens as a plant develops? It will develop a storage root. So in this case, in this plant, okay, the sugar is being made in the leaves, so that is a source, okay, in the leaf at this point in the plant's life. The root is a sink, okay? Because what you have is photosynthesis happening in the leaf, right? And then being translocated in the phloem to the sink, which in this case is a root, which gets nice and fat and happy with all the sugar or starches that it's storing in there, because some plants can store sugar, like a sugar beet will store, sugar in its root. But also you have other kinds of plants, such as cassava and etc., that will store starch, because remember, starch is usually the storage product of plants. Well, anyway, over the winter, in temperate areas, what will happen is the upper part of the plant, the leaf part, will die or die back, and then you have the root still in the ground overwintering. In the next season, okay, this root will actually then be moving the sugar from the root into the new leaves of the plant. Okay, and so in this case, the root is actually serving as a source. Because what is a source? We'll get into that, we'll put that up on the screen in just a minute. But in this case, a root is serving as a source. What's serving as a sink in this case is the leaves, and also in the second year of growth, you have an inflorescence. Okay, flowers blooming. So in this case, the source is a root, and then the sink is the flowers, or the flowering part, or the inflorescence. Okay, so you can see, depending on what part of the life cycle the plant is in, okay, you can see that it will actually change, okay, depending on what part of the life cycle. So this is what happens in the case of a biennial plant. Okay, so generally the movement of sugar goes from a source, okay, where the sugar is either made or stored, depending on where the plant is in its life cycle, and the sink is where the sugar is either stored or used. Okay, all right, okay, very good. Now here we have a very good example of a sugar producing, and this of course is very evocative for many people in Hawaii because, for one thing, sugar cane, also known as ko, okay, Saccharum officinarum, this is a plant brought by Polynesian peoples, okay, to Hawaii. The people who became the Hawaiian people brought it with them, and I believe they use this plant mostly, as far as I know, they usually use it as a chaser for medicine. If you had a bitter medicine you wanted to take, because what's happening is that this plant here is doing photosynthesis, okay, then translocating the sugars made in the leaves to its sink, from the source in the leaves to the sink. Okay, in this case, the sink is a stem, okay, of this plant. Now the stem, of course, almost everybody who grew up in Hawaii remembers maybe going to the sugar plantations. They don't even have them anymore, I think, on Oahu. But you used to be able to visit a sugar plantation, and usually the foreman, somebody there, the luna, whatever they call them, I don't know if they still call them luna anymore because it has negative connotations. But what happens is that they'll actually take a stem, chop it up, and they'll give each of the kids a little piece of sugarcane stem to chew, and it's really the best thing. It's much better than candy, because you have that nice sucrose, yeah, in the stem, and it's very tasty, but it's not too sweet. Oftentimes when you have a candy bar, boy, that's a big hit of sugar, and that actually will do things to your blood sugar, which isn't very bad. I mean, isn't very good. Okay, alrighty. Now the next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of get into and lay the groundwork for our next subject, which is going to be photosynthesis. Okay, so first of all, what is metabolism? Remember that metabolism is one characteristic of living things. Things that are non-living don't have metabolism, such as, remember we talked about viruses? Viruses don't have metabolism. They don't actually do anything unless they've infected another cell. Okay, so viruses are non-living, all right? So viruses do not have metabolism, whereas animals like us, plants, they do have metabolism. So what is metabolism? It's a sum total of all the chemical reactions that happen inside of an organism. And in plants, that includes, photosynthesis, all right? Now, in terms of metabolism, so what is metabolism? It has to do with biochemical changes. It has to do with biochemical, events going on inside of a plant as well as inside of an animal. So we have two concepts known as anabolism and catabolism, okay? So first of all, anabolism generally means that you put smaller molecules together to form larger molecules. So you can remember which is which because you can think of, most people have heard of anabolic steroids. So what do anabolic steroids do? They are substances that people take, usually young fellows, yeah, they're kind of into bodybuilding, they want to bulk up, so they might take these steroids. So anabolic steroids, you can think of building up, getting bigger, okay? Smaller molecules making larger molecules. So that's what you call anabolism. So photosynthesis is an anabolic process. The inverse of that is catabolism. That's when you actually break down a larger molecule into smaller molecules, okay? And generally catabolism, that is sort of like the overall thing that happens during another kind of biological process known as cellular respiration. Okay, when you have a larger molecule, breaking it down to smaller molecules. So anabolism means building up, catabolism means breaking down, okay? Now, another concept we have to talk about is energy. Generally, the most general definition of energy is the ability to do work. Okay, energy in physics, I guess in chemistry also, they call it the ability to do work, all right? And this kind of energetics, or what energy can do, okay, is ruled by what we call physical laws. So when you say physical laws, it usually does have to do with physics, okay? So physical laws, okay? So energy is ruled by physical laws. The ability to do work is ruled by physical laws. So we have to talk about thermodynamics. Okay, thermal refers to energetics and heat, right? Dynamics has to do with changeability, I guess. So the first law of thermodynamics, this is like a law. When they say a law, you know, something is a law, that is like a concept that doesn't ever change. Okay, so the first law of thermodynamics is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. What does that mean? That means that the energy in the universe is constant. And that means that you cannot make energy, you cannot destroy energy, but energy can be converted from one form to another. You can convert mechanical energy or energy of movement or mechanics to chemical energy. You can also, so there's different kinds of energy, and they can be converted from one form of energy to another form of energy. Anyway, so that's the first law of thermodynamics. It has to do with the conservation of energy. You cannot create energy, you cannot destroy it, but you can convert it from one form to another. Now, the second law of thermodynamics has to do with the conversion of energy from one form of another. So when you convert energy from one type of energy to another type of energy, you lose energy from that particular system in the form of heat, okay? So you might think, well, that might contraindicate the first law of thermodynamics, but it does not. You know why? Because generally in the universe, energy is constant. You can convert it from one form to another and sort of lose energy, okay, in a certain form, but that is not necessarily so, because the energy in the universe at all is constant. Okay, so if we can go to the Elmo here, we'll kind of show a little car. Okay, I usually draw like a little bug. I used to be obsessed with Volkswagen bugs, the old bugs. Okay, so we have a little car here, okay, with a little gas pipe here. Okay, so here's this little car, okay, with a driver, yeah, person in here driving their car. When you actually have your gasoline that you put into your car, okay, how much of it do you think is actually used? I know this always looks like a bird whenever I draw it, but if you have a little gasoline thing, okay, leading to that place at the service station, what do you think is the total amount of energy that is in the gasoline molecules? Because remember, gasoline comes from crude oil. Remember that crude oil actually comes from the breakdown of many, many photosynthetic, billions and billions of photosynthetic organisms that lived a long, long time ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. So what we call hydrocarbons, which is a whole bunch of carbon atoms joined together with hydrogens joined to them too. So there is energy in the chemical bonds that hold this molecule together. So when we have our combustion engine, we're actually using oxygen to break down the gasoline molecule, okay? So what is that? That is actually, what kind of a reaction is that? That's actually catabolism, right? You have a very large, very large hydrocarbon that is being broken down in the combustion engine, okay, as the engine is moving. So what do you think? Okay, if we can go back to the Elmo again. So what all this exhaust coming out here, okay, what do you have? You have carbon monoxide, you have carbon dioxide, you'll have sulfur, you'll have water, right? Oops, water. You'll have heat, you have light. Okay, of course, your engine always gets hot whenever you use it, okay? So what happens is that to make your car go forward, you're actually, all that money that you're spending to pay for your gasoline, only about 25%. Okay, all the energy in the gasoline molecule is actually used to make your car move or to turn the lights on or anything like that. About 75% is actually given off as a waste product. Okay, so here you can see that the combustion engine, actually, considering other kind of human-made, man-made systems, it's pretty efficient. But you can see that it's not that efficient. So about 75% of the money that you're putting into the gasoline in your car is actually literally going up in smoke, unfortunately, Oh well, but maybe we can someday improve that. You never know. We human beings are capable of all kinds of things, good as well as bad, So energy is the ability to do work. So we saw a little bit, so potential energy. So potential energy is actually stored energy, okay, or energy of position. So if you rode your bike to the top of a hill, and you're standing on top of the hill, you and your body, you have a lot of potential energy because you're high up. You're high up on the hill. Okay, so that is actually stored energy, and we can see in the hydrocarbons too, the stored energy, potential energy is held in the chemical bonds that hold the molecule together, okay? Now kinetic energy is just energy of action, it's energy of movement, it's actually energy being used. Okay, so energy always is the ability to do work. Potential energy is still energy because it has the ability to do work, even if it has to do with position or storage. Okay, and of course with chemicals, the energy is stored in the chemical bonds, the covalent bonds that make up a substance. All right. Next, we have to talk a little bit about what we call redox reactions. That is like oxidation and reduction. Okay, this is like basic stuff that you need to know in biology, all right, even though it does have to do with chemistry as well. So for me, you just have to memorize this, and for me it was easy to memorize when you think, so what is reduction, what is oxidation? For me, it comes down to LEO and GER, Leo, GER. Leo, LEO, you think of loss of electrons. So when you have a redox reaction, that's a transfer of electrons from one substance to another. So LEO, loss of electrons is oxidation. Okay, LEO, loss of electrons is oxidation. Okay, you think of GER or GER. Gain of electrons is reduction. You can kind of think of it in a different way. You can think of also reduction being using a minus. When you reduce something, you take something away. So you can think of an electron with its negative charge. Okay, if an electron or a negative charge is added, that's a reduction. Okay, so it's easier sometimes to think of Leo GER. Okay, another kind of reaction that happens, okay, is phosphorylation. Phosphorylation is merely the transfer of a phosphate group, okay, from one molecule to another. And in the case of, so this is when phosphate group is taken away from one molecule and added to another. In the case that we're generally going to be using, when we're talking about all these different kinds of metabolic activities inside of the plants, we have like here, you have ADP. ADP is an acronym, it's a short way of saying adenosine diphosphate. So adenosine diphosphate has two phosphate groups. You add another phosphate group and put energy into it, because this is actually what? Is this anabolism or catabolism, right? Well, think about it. Anyway, so this is phosphorylation anyway. So you have ADP plus a phosphate group. Okay, you're actually making a little larger molecule. You put energy in order to allow this to happen. Why do you have to do that? Well, because when you have three phosphate groups making ATP, yeah, you have an adenosine, plus you have three phosphate groups making it up too. The three phosphate groups, they're all charged similarly. I believe they have a little bit of a negative charge. Let's see, or something. Anyway, so they're actually charged similar to each other. So when you have these three phosphate groups with the same charges, they have a tendency to actually repel each other. So you have to put quite a bit of energy into making ATP. That's why ATP is actually the currency in the cell, is because ATP has a lot of energy. This is a form of energy that the cell will generally recognize, okay? So ATP, very important, and that is a result of when you add a phosphate group, another phosphate group to ADP. Okay, so you had adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate group plus energy, then you'll have adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Okay. Alrighty, so here you're showing that let's see, reaction. Okay, in terms of redox reaction. So here you have a hydrogen molecule, right? A hydrogen molecule is when you have two hydrogen atoms covalently bonded to each other. And here I think you call it a fluorine molecule, fluorine or fluoride molecule. You have two fluorines, okay, bonded to each other in covalent bonding. What happens is that these two hydrogen atoms, okay, each will donate an electron, right? So this one here, this hydrogen atom is being oxidized, right? It's actually losing electrons. Remember, loss of electrons is oxidation, right? So they're being oxidized. Then this fluorine, okay, these fluorines are actually being reduced because they're gaining electrons. So what you have in this chemical reaction is that you end up with, I guess they call it hydrogen fluoride, right? You have one hydrogen atom, one fluorine atom each. Okay, so here you have like an example of an oxidation or a redox reaction. Yes? Alrighty. Let's see. Next, we're going to talk about enzymes. What are enzymes? Okay. So here we have another very nice illustration of an enzyme. What are they? Do you folks remember what kind of macromolecules or biological molecules enzymes are? Think about it. They're proteins. Remember, proteins are among the largest and most complex of all the biological kind of molecules. Okay, so enzymes generally are proteins. And remember that we mentioned before about the levels of protein structure. Enzymes are actually proteins, and proteins are made by joining together amino acids in the process known as anabolism, right? So what do? They catalyze chemical reactions. They actually allow chemical reactions to go forward. So you can have you can have a solution of some kind of substance, and the chemical reaction will have a tendency to go forward. But sometimes they might take a long time, minutes, hours, days, years even. So what happens is that if you have enzymes, they allow chemical reactions to happen by lowering the activation energy. They speed up chemical reactions. Okay, so enzymes are vital, okay, for different kinds of biological and biochemical reactions that happen in the cell. Okay. Next, we're going to get into a little bit about photosynthesis. We're going to do a little bit of the groundwork, and then we'll continue, okay? So photosynthesis is the conversion of light energy from the sun to chemical energy, okay, in the form of sugars and other biological molecules, okay? So one thing, from the sun, you get something called electromagnetic radiation, okay? That is responsible for what we call visible light, all right? So, let's see. So, visible light actually doesn't make up very much of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum, okay? So, if we can go to the Elmo, we can actually say that on this kind of spectrum, electromagnetic, so the electromagnetic spectrum, okay, EM energy, electromagnetic energy from the sun, you can have it divided up into certain sort of components, all right? And then here, okay, so we have that, we have this, and we have the other. See, on this side, this is more the low energy that has longer wavelengths, okay? So this could be something like the radio waves. You know, like when you listen to the radio in your car or at home, those are radio waves. They tend to be low level, low energy kind of radiation. Amazingly, microwaves are also low energy radiation, okay? Then right here you have the infrared, I think they abbreviated IF, infrared radiation. Then here in this very small area is what you call visible light, okay? So visible light actually makes up a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum which we get from the sun. Here's UV, ultraviolet light, all right? Then we have X-rays. So on this side, we're getting to high energy radiation, some of which can be very damaging. And these ones here are called gamma rays, okay? This little symbol just is the third letter of the Greek alphabet called gamma. Here you have alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Anyway, so here, low energy, long wavelength, okay, on this side. Visible light all the way from red to orange, okay, to yellow, to green, to blue, to violet. And then above that, you have ultraviolet. Then we have X-rays. We know what X-rays are. They can penetrate through into your body, okay? Gamma rays, very dangerous, very, very dangerous radiation, okay? Very high energy. Okay, so visible light comprises, a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, okay? All right. All right, so another thing about light, which is kind of interesting, is that this visible light, has a dual nature. It is actually both a particle and a wave. So when you actually graph it, you will actually see wavelengths, okay? But generally how it acts as a particle. It hits whatever it's hitting in discrete packets called photons, okay? Photons are the particles of light, right? So the thing is, so light has a dual nature, Okay, it hits as a discrete entity known as a photon, but it travels in a wave. So this has wavelengths, all right? So generally, like we saw in that little drawing that I made, the longer the wavelength, the less energy you have, okay? The shorter the wavelength, the more energy you have. So what we call visible light, okay, is generally part of the spectrum known from 380 nanometers, which is high energy, to 670 nanometers. Okay, which is lower energy, okay? So here, visible light from about 380 nanometers to 760 nanometers. So you think, what is a nanometer? Okay, so remember, meter is a measurement of length, and nano means a billionth. Okay, remember we have milli meaning thousandth, micro meaning millionth. Well, nanometer means a billionth of a meter, so it's very, very, very small. Okay, so visible light, you know, kind of hits in a certain kind of way, all right? Now this visible light, furthermore, is absorbed by plants, okay? Okay, so how is this visible light absorbed, okay? So what we're gonna do is that we're gonna continue with this next time, okay? So here, right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue next time, okay? And what we'll try to do is we'll try to summarize a little bit, okay? So, let's see. So in the summary here, okay, first of all, we have the fact that leaves, of course, do photosynthesis, very important to know. Transpiration happens through the stomates, you know, in leaves. And we're going to get into photosynthesis a little bit later in our next session. We recall too, light reactions happen in the grana. The Calvin cycle happens in the stroma, right? Anyway, so I guess that's all we have time for today, all right? So we'll see you next time. Remember to email me any questions you might have. So we'll see you then, okay? Aloha.